We'll have the music playing. Okay, there it is.
Yeah, I see it. We're up and moving.
Hello, hello, hello. We're going to give folks a little while to join us before we get started, but we wanted to just get on and give people a chance to tune in. Oh, let me tag you in this so you can. Okay, you're having a dance party over there.
Oh, this is a bop. Melba says, hello, doctors.
I'm trying to make sure I can see people's comments. Okay, all right, we got some folks joining in. Hey y'all, welcome, welcome, welcome. Before we get started, I just want to make sure you know that the music you can hear in the background was written by none other than Mr. Samuel Brown Sr. So that's my husband, y'all, in case you don't know that. I'm trying to make sure I can see people's comments. Okay, all right, we got some folks joining in. Hey y'all, welcome.
I can hear you.
Started. I just want to make sure you know that the music you can hear in the background.
Oh, I want to say this name wrong. Is it Shalom Coleman? Says, hey there. I don't know if I said that right. If I said it wrong, I apologize. Good afternoon, Dr. West.
Okay, Keish, can you see the comments?
I can see the comments. Yes, ma'am.
You can. All right. Let me make sure I can see them.
Janice McCurt says, so
hey y'all. Hey everybody. Thank y'all for coming to my little live. Okay.
It's not a little live. You wrote a whole book.
Okay, ma'am. It's a whole live. I'm gonna there's a little bit of a delay. Hi everybody, come on in, come on in. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes.
Come and back with me. This Saturday. Music is nice. Mary says, hey docs. Dr. West said, where's your Zoom mask? No, sir. No, sir.
Dr. West, we don't need masks on Zoom.
Oh. Edith Shepard said, hello, Jesse. Kaya said, yes, a whole live. See, Kaya know what I'm talking about. Rashad Roberts said, good afternoon.
Listen, and the folks are punctual this afternoon.
Better be on. Where they got to go?
West, we don't need masks on Zoom.
That's not nice. Y'all could have chosen other things to do than, but
hey auntie, hey brother.
Yes, I do have.
You better have the book in the background.
Yes.
Tamara, you know she extra.
Because I have a friend that wrote a book and is amazing, and I will put.
Did you see, Keish? Did you see Rashad talking about? Is this why we're not having class?
I mean, well,
this is your class for the day.
You're welcome. How about that? Like, you're welcome. This is prime practical theology right here in action.
This is practical theology at work.
How about that?
That's
Your
funny.
homework, matter of fact.
So I say we have about 30 some people watching. I say we go ahead and jump right in so we can be on time.
Yes, let's do
And
this.
the folks will join us when they are ready to join us.
I love it. All right, so welcome. Did you want to start welcome or should I start the welcome? Because I know this is about you. So I
You
want you
can start since you're technically hosting
indeed.
this event.
I'm very excited to be hosting this event. If you already know, I'll try to contain myself. So my name is Lakeisha Lockhart, and I get the honor and privilege of hosting this book launch live with the one and only amazing Dr. Jessica Young Brown. And we originally had a nice physical launch party that was going to have like food and hors d'oeuvres. I mean, just, all the things. But due to COVID-19, aka coronavirus, aka the Rona,
AKA Rona.
we are now hosting it live, which, because we knew this book was just way too important to not talk about, especially in the midst of everything going on. So here we are live to talk about this book. But first, let me introduce you to the author. Dr. Jessica Young Brown is a counseling psychologist who serves as assistant professor of counseling and practical theology at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. All that, there you go. In this capacity, she teaches and provides consultation and program development on issues of vocation, spiritual formation, and human development. Dr. Brown is also a licensed clinical psychologist and certified clinical trauma professional in private practice, and provides education and consultation to churches and community organizations on mental health and organizational issues. In her clinical practice, Dr. Brown focuses on women's issues and relational concerns. She completed her undergraduate education at Elon University in Elon, North Carolina. She then matriculated at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Oh, Rams.
Where she received her MS and PhD degrees, both in counseling psychology. In addition to her work obligations, as if that wasn't enough, Dr. Brown is engaged at the community level. She is the, make sure I say this right, Varina District.
Varina. You've been in Virginia long enough to know how to say Varina, Dr. Lockhart.
I'm from Georgia, no. District representative and chair for the Henrico County Board of Mental Health and Developmental Services. She's also the vice chair of the board of directors for, is it VipCare?
VipCare, yeah.
VipCare, a nonprofit organization focused on providing faith-based counseling services in the Richmond community. In addition to her teaching responsibilities and community engagement, Dr. Brown serves as the director of the Barry Young Center for Ministry Formation, which provides vocational coaching and support to ministers at various stages of ministry. The center provides education and intervention on issues such as vocational discernment, burnout prevention and recovery, and personal wellness. She's also, amongst these things, a mother.
This bias. This is too much.
She does all the things. And of course, in all the spare time she wrote a book. In this book, she introduces a practical understanding of mental health as something all people should seek. And she uses the biblical motif of the village well to encourage supportive ministries and pastoral care skills in the local congregation. In particular, Dr. Young Brown calls the Black church to rally its historic resilience and communal creativity by providing culturally relevant strategies to engage people who struggle with mental health concerns in her book, Making Space, it's right behind me, Making Space at the Well, Mental Health and the Church. Let's just take a minute to soak all that in. Applause for all you are and all you. Oh, I'm just so excited. She's the most amazing person. I'm one of them. I know.
Listen, just a note, y'all. If you don't have one, get you a sister friend like Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart, okay? You need that friend that will hype you up. Right. Come on, introduction. This is get a friend like her. If you don't already have one, you need one in your life.
But I will say, when that show where your CV right there, you don't even need one. You just say, read my stats. Ask about me. So that's all of who she is. And she's so much more, obviously. But that's all we're just going to tell you in this space, just to whet your appetite to let you know that she's more than qualified to write this book, and that you need to have it. But we're just going to take this time to just ask some questions about this book, again, to let you kind of know a little bit about what it's about why you should have this book if you don't already have it, or who you might need to be gifting it to, who might need to have it in your life. So let's start with this. Is there anything about you that we should know that I haven't already said? How about that part?
Um, okay, so other than, there are other parts of me that are not professional, right? So I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a mommy, I'm a friend. I'm one of those people who I'm just really grateful to have the life that God has blessed me with. And so I try to make the most of every single moment, try to have fun. I like to work hard and play hard. And so all of those things are a part of who I am. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, in all the meantime, she wrote a whole book. I'm just saying, amongst all of this. So when you're thinking about doing this book, what actually inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I have to give kudos to my dear friend, Dr. Rebecca Hubbard in Chicago, Illinois. She's a psychologist in private practice. We were in graduate school together. And sort of the frame for this book started as a class project. We were taking community psychology, and one of the assignments was to essentially create, hey, Michelle, one of the assignments was essentially to create an intervention for a community organization. And I'm a church baby. And so my orientation has always really been about, from very early on, figuring out a way to be the bridge between the mental health community and the faith community. I watched my dad, and many of you have probably heard this story, but I watched my dad essentially burn out and get really depressed. And even though he got treatment and kind of got what he needed, it was clear to me that we weren't really talking about what was going on. Like we didn't have the language to say, this is what depression looks like, or how can you have, and the personal struggle for me was like, okay, I know this person loves God with his whole entire heart and soul. How can he be the one who ends up getting depressed? Like how do those things fit? And so from very early on, it was clear to me that once I realized I wanted to be a mental health professional, that the people who I was called to serve were the church folks. So I'm in graduate school, I'm in this community psychology class, and I'm like, okay, what if I can develop like a Bible study on mental health for a church? Just as a class project. And the cool thing about it was Rebecca and I actually had the opportunity to present it as a Bible study at the church we were attending at the time, Anointed New Life Baptist Church, Pastor C. Diane Mosby here in Richmond. And so both of us were attending that church at the time. And she gave us 6 weeks of Bible study to teach this curriculum on, really, at the time, it was really just about awareness of healthy relationships and like what people need to be okay. And Rebecca and I were kind of talking about the project, and she looks at me and she says, "You're going to publish this, right?" And I'm like, no, it's just a Bible study. It's just a class project. It's no big deal. And so, the story of Rebecca and I's history is that I'm downplaying something that I'm doing. And she's like, Jess, no, this is good. This is a big deal, right? And so she kind of planted that seed 10 years ago now. And the curriculum is something that since that time, I've taught at countless churches. I have been, kind of praying over it and reorganizing it and shifting the pieces and changing the labels of the different pieces of the acronym. And finally, about maybe a year and a half ago now, I said, okay, it's time. So the interesting thing is that because I've been teaching and working with this for so long, that when it came time to sit down and write the book, that was in some ways the easy part, because I've been doing the work for 10 years. And it was really just an opportunity to write down, all my soapbox speeches from classes that my students have heard, all the times I've gone on a tangent about something about the way the church can respond to mental health, right? And so it was a chance to really organize that and connect it to biblical truth in a way that was really accessible, or at least I hope it's accessible to people.
Great. So you mentioned the timeline. I just want to hear it. So was it about, like, you said about a year and a half it took you to write this? Well, I
Um,
mean, obviously many more because you were gathering and you were praying and you were teaching.
yeah, so I think from the time I actually sat down and decided this needs to be a book proposal, maybe 6 to 8 months of actually writing it. The writing part was easy. There's the publishing process is kind of long, right? And so I think I initially submitted the book proposal to the publisher. This is mm, what is this, April of 2020. The Rona got me all disoriented. So this is April of 2020. I think I submitted the proposal to the publisher a little over a year and a half ago. It was like the fall of 2018, believe it or not. And so when I submitted the proposal, I had written a couple of chapters. And over the course of my waiting time, I just decided that I was going to finish writing the rest of the book so that if they said yes, it would be theirs. If they said no, I would have a whole book to send to another publisher. And they said yes. So by the time they said yes, the book was written and ready to go. And here we are.
Yay, here we are. And we're glad. We're so glad. But I'm just using that to see like how long that this has been in you. And I'm just glad that you were able to make this word flesh in the world because it needs to be. And so you mentioned that you originally used it as a Bible study. So I'm curious, what do you think the best way that people can use this book most effectively would be?
I think it's still great to use as a Bible study. I was intentional about trying to make the book accessible to a wide range of people. Hey, Aunt Charlene. So this is not, I want to be clear, I work a lot with clergy and provide consultation to clergy around mental health issues, but this book is not just written for clergy. It really is for everybody in the church, everybody who cares about the church. So I was very intentional about making it accessible. It is a great resource if you have absolutely no information about mental health and you don't know anything. It's also, I think, a helpful resource if you know something about mental health but really want to figure out how to take practical steps to try to make your church or your community one that is more open and inclusive. So there are a couple of different ways you can use it. One, as an individual, if you really just want to get more information about, you hear these terms thrown around like being a trauma-informed community, or, the language I use in the book is ministry for mental health. And that distinction for me is really important because a part of it is owning that we all have experiences and symptoms and we all need care at some point. And so as an individual, it's a book that you could read to just figure out what are the best practices for ways I can engage with people on a daily basis so that I am a person who is safe.
Mm.
So at the individual level, it could be helpful in that regard. At the church-wide level, I also try to provide some concrete strategies for churches who are trying to change the ethos in their community. That's down from logistics in terms of where is there a safe space in our church building where people can go and have confidential conversations? Or how do we keep track of the kinds of resources that people in our church need? Down to what are the ways we educate people during Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May. So it's coming up. For instance, one of the things in the book is one of the appendices in the book is a litany for Mental Health Awareness Month. And so starting at whatever level your church is at, there's a way to just kind of get the conversation going. And for some churches or for some individual people, that might be, hey, let's talk about mental health. Let's bring up the conversation that 20% of American adults at some point in their lives will meet criteria for a diagnosable condition. So if you got more than 5 people in your church, somebody is probably impacted by a mental health condition. And part of the responsibility that we have as believers and as people who care about other people is to bring that which was in the dark to light. And so my hope is that this book really does that it really shines a light just on the ways that we can care for the people who we're already in relationship with.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I just want to, quote you from your book, if you don't mind, because you talk about how we often don't make spaces for people to suffer while they're in community. And so
Yeah.
part of, I think, what your book is, what you're mentioning is that it offers that it's not just about prayer, it's also about action. And you talk about that beautifully. So I'm just going to read real quick from page 17. She says, because I mean, when your girl writes it and she's already amazing, you just read what she wrote. Too often our interactions stop with prayer. Let me be clear about this. Prayer is amazing, exclamation point. It connects us with God. It reminds us of our faith walk and it changes things. But we must acknowledge that many people in our churches need more than prayer. They need prayer and action. And I think that that's a crucial point of what you're saying. You're saying, yeah, I'm writing this book and you can pray all day, but I'm also going to give you strategies
Absolutely.
to actually help you, to let you know what kind of things to look for, to what kind of language you should be using. You even give examples of what kind of language to avoid, what kind of language helps bring in the conversation, which I think many of us need if we're not equipped or we don't know, so that we can at least get them to the next step to a provider, right? And so I
Sure.
think this book is amazing. And as you mentioned, whether it's a Bible study or whatnot, I'm so excited to be using it in class. I would even say, as the religious educator in me, is that if there's anyone dealing with churches or seminarians or people that will then be working in churches, this is a must read book, especially because we don't talk about it. So how do we know what signs to look for? So I would throw that in there. But also, while we're talking about the Bible study, I'm going to flash a giveaway moment. We're going to be
Hey,
doing a
giveaway,
little giveaway right now of a free book. So either if you don't already have one, you can get one for free, or you can gift it to someone. But I'm going to ask a question. And basically the first person to answer this question correctly will be getting a free book.
And I'm watching the comments, so I'll know. Everybody's we
Oh,
got a hallelujah section on the comments saying prayer and action.
exactly. Amen. Faith without works
Amen.
is dead. Where that works at? Where's the works? So the Bible giveaway. Here we go. Boom, 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 boom. Everybody get
We're
ready.
not giving away a Bible. We're giving away copies of the book.
Book. When I
Y'all,
said Bible, no,
you
not
said
Bible. You should already have your Bible. I mean, this is a book.
Bible's on your phone.
All right. So in her book, she uses the reference of the well, and she uses a particular scripture passage when she's talking about the well that she uses as her imagery. I want the book and the chapter that she asks us to use and read that she got her image from about the well. And we'll continue to talk.
Yeah,
And
but
you know what?
whoever answers correctly first,
Mhm.
I'll let you know who you are, and then you can direct message me your address, and I will mail you a signed copy of the book.
Indeed.
Oh, Marco says John 4.
Doggone Marco. We were trying to wait to the end, but
Marco has been waiting for the opportunity to not run me the $17 for this book for months. And
really,
he
Marco?
finally got it.
I can't even deal with Marco right now. But yes, it was John 4. Can't do it.
Marco, send me your address. Sister Lorraine Ponder, she's second, but I am going to send you a copy too because she is also doing this good work.
Mm,
So Marco
mm.
and Sister Ponder, if you all will please direct message me your addresses and I will send you a signed copy of the book.
Absolutely. And don't worry, at the end, we'll tell you other ways that you can buy the book.
Other ways, everybody else, you're gonna have to buy. Thank you for your support. God bless you.
Amen.
Tiffany, I didn't see your comment. Tiffany said she said it before Marco. It's about to be a fight in the comments.
Oh, I didn't see
Yes,
it.
Lord. I didn't see it either.
You press send.
Listen,
I didn't see it in the comments. Well, we'll rehash that later.
yeah, we can deal with that.
Don't start fighting the comments.
God is not the author of confusion.
Not
So,
even a little bit. Uh, but what I will say is, so you mentioned how the book can be used,
yeah.
and we talked about how it can help churches. So would you also say that that's your greatest hope for this book moving forward, is that it kind of lives and breathes in church communities?
Yes, in church communities, but also in the individual spirit of the person who reads it. Like my hope is that people read the book and they're just like, oh, I can do that. Like it's not rocket science. And there are a couple of times in the book where I'm like, I'm aware that this is actually not a really sophisticated idea. And so my prayer is that it's just accessible, that when you finish reading the book, you feel like the next encounter you have with somebody, you can take that opportunity to use some of the strategies that we have in place. This is not, and I say this in the book too, like, this is not about little mental health ministries popping up all over everywhere. Because the reality is, with the logistical reality of some of our churches, not everyone can start a mental health ministry that looks the same way, right? So even if you don't start any new ministry in your church, what you can do when you finish reading the book is have a way to treat people. That if they come into your church and they're anxious or depressed or overwhelmed, you can, in word and deed, let them know that there is space for them to be all of who they are, even the messy parts, even the messed up parts, even the addicted parts, even the crazy parts. That's my hope.
Mm. So if that was, if there was one thing that if they didn't take away anything else, if they literally, for some reason they blacked out during half of the book or whatever,
Yeah.
would that be the one thing you would want them to take away, or would it be something else?
The one takeaway is that Jesus really already set the model for what it means to just meet people where they are. And so much of our political agenda in churches sometimes is around changing people into the kind of Christian that is appealing to us. We don't, most of us, it's not intentional. Like, we're not out here like, I want to change people to be my kind of Christian. We're not doing it on purpose. But I think some of the ways that we do church unintentionally reinforce that perspective. And so I think in chapter 6 somewhere I say, the point of this is just like, be like Jesus, right? Jesus is like, you a prostitute? Cool, come on. You a tax collector? Cool, come on. You steal? Cool, come on. You want to have dinner? Let's sit down and talk. Like, there's so much we can gain if we would just access all of Jesus. And I tell my students all the time, like, we love Jesus on the cross. We love suffering Jesus. We love, the Jesus that says, Lord, not my will, but thy will be done, right? But literally the moment before that, Jesus says, look, I'm just saying, if you can take this cup, I'm cool with that. Right? The same night, he asks his boys to pray and they fall asleep, and he's pissed when he realizes that, right? And so I think a part of what we can do is really just connect with all of who Jesus is, because all of who Jesus is, we can connect with all of that, and not just the pieces that are sacrificial and, in the place of martyrdom. We really have a guideline for what it means to treat people, for what it means to let everybody in, regardless of how they look and smell and act, and to be a place that people can find healing if we just provide the conduit to God. Like, we don't have to do the healing part. We just have to make space for people to show up. And so Space at the Well is literally about creating a community where no matter how broken people feel they are, they don't feel that brokenness limits them to the power of God.
And as you're saying that, I'm just thinking about this humanness and why, and like you said, Jesus is our model. And again, I'm going to quote you from the book. I'm trying to whet people's appetite. Here you go. So page 84, the Dr. Young Brown says, first, Jesus was human. We celebrate his divinity and his perfection, but I think we lose sight of the fact that Jesus was a real person with real feelings, who had real relationships and even real struggles. And then a little later, she says, our salvation has never, and I imagine a head turn, never, ever required us to deny our humanness. That demand is and has always been a human construct. And I love the way you just put it plain. You just say, that's not even about Jesus. That's about us.
That's about us.
Trying to make ourselves other things or trying to take on other things when we're human, and it's okay to be human. And realize that doesn't mean that you're lacking anything. That doesn't mean that you are, you talk about a lot about, you don't like to use the term crazy that people want to use and put on people, but we're human. And just like we take care of other things that we're going through, this is another area where we need to be aware of and take care of and seek help when we need it. And I love the way you make it human. You remind us of our humanity and that Jesus was human. And I think sometimes we need to come back to that and realize that and say, hey, if I can be human, then so can everyone else. And I think that's
absolutely
beautiful and powerful. And I'm so grateful for that. that you mentioned that. So I'm going to ask her another question or two, and then we're going to start taking some online questions. So feel free to start populating them. I just want you to know I'm getting all these yeses.
Yeah,
That's
I
right.
can see the comments over
You're
here.
welcome. You're welcome.
Y'all shouting better than I'm preaching.
I mean, basically, I'm going to play this back on Sunday and then listen to it so then it can be my sermon for Sunday because it's that good and I don't want to miss this. And I'm pretty sure I'm probably missing just talking. I'm sure there's some more nuggets I need to go back and get. So, Dr. Young Brown, you already mentioned all the amazing things that you are doing. You have written this book. I mean, you are out here doing articles. She has articles with the Christian Citizen, Faith and Leadership, if you want to find her other places. She just did a podcast interview with Reclaim. I mean, she's just out here in all these streets. And so what is next for you? Is it another book? Is it where else can we find things about you? What's next?
So what's next for me? That is a complicated question. So one of the things that kind of came up for me as I was writing this book, particularly as I was writing the introduction, which kind of lays the framework for some of the particularities of the Black church. As I was reflecting on that experience and reflecting on my clinical work, my sort of academic attention has been drawn to generational trauma in African Americans. And for people who are unfamiliar with that term, I'm going to recommend a book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Joy DeGruy-Leary. And so I've been doing a lot of educating and workshops and consultations with community organizations, particularly mental health organizations, around how generational trauma shows up in African Americans and what that means for mental health outcomes. And one of the things that has come up for me in my teaching about it and in my consulting about it is that a big piece of the way Black folks understand themselves in this country is through the lens of that trauma. And we often don't have the language to name it or explore it. As a mental health professional, one of the things that I know is that when we haven't been given space to name our trauma, we are much less likely to be able to heal from it and move forward from it. And so my attention is really being drawn there. I would love to and kind of have the plans for a book that talks really about that trauma piece. My heart is always the church, and so that's going to be a part of it as well. But my vision is really to think about and explore both the consequences and the solutions around generational trauma in African Americans at the individual level, at the family level, at the church level, at the community level. So I don't know what that would look like. For my church folks,
We'll get it.
We call it generational curses, right? From a mental health perspective, is generational trauma. Is that we pass down ways of being that were once really helpful for our survival and now sometimes end up hurting us and costing us more than they help us.
Well, whatever it is, we'll get it. We're going to get it because it needs to be living on all of our shelves. Because I'm sure what you were just saying, I'm pretty sure people were just like, you're right. And even though the language may be different, it's that sentiment that we get and that we understand, especially whether, and the thing is, this is not just church communities, but family communities. I mean, all kinds of things that we're experiencing, like, as you said, on all these different levels, that I think it's not only that book will be powerful, but in the same way that this book is powerful. Because I think even just in families, to be able to know what to look for with your loved ones, to be able to understand, especially amid what's happening right now, when people are withdrawing or when people are doing so, how can I ask the question? How can I phrase it? Even just in your own family, I think this is a powerful tool. She's gonna post the name of the.
I'm doing it now. Joy.
So so thank you for sharing all this. We're at the point where we're gonna take some of your questions. So do you have any questions for her about this book? About anything along those lines that you all may be having questions about? I will say, while you guys are posting questions, Dr. Young Brown, do you have any advice for us, especially amid what's going on with COVID-19, the coronavirus? I know you're doing mental health tips on Facebook, right? Each Friday, you're giving us great, amazing tips to help us stay in a good place, or at least in a well place ish.
Yeah.
But do you have any other advice for us while people are populating their questions?
So I would say my main advice is to allow yourself to feel whatever you feel. You know, I don't know about you all, but I have never lived through a global pandemic. I don't have any predictions about how my heart and mind and body will respond. And so, a big piece of this process for me has been just letting myself feel what I feel. This semester for me was really packed um, with plans. And frankly, because of just the overwhelm of this experience, I ain't been getting that stuff done, you know? Like I don't have the capacity. And so for me, it's been about being able to extend myself and others grace. You know, that really we are doing the best that we can in a really challenging situation. And the commitments I've made to myself are to take care of my body, to take care of my family, and to make sure we are doing what we need to be okay. I think that's all that we can ask of ourselves. Other than that, you know, you can search the internet and find lots of different specific, you know, tools and tips and strategies. And, you know, you find what works for you and you leave the rest. And ultimately, you know, we have a responsibility to care for ourselves first. What I'm not going to do is buy into this notion that I can be just as productive, that I can be the same kind of professional, the same kind of educator that I typically am under normal circumstances, because this is not normal circumstances. Right. And even in terms of the way we do church, you know, like we want to, you know, you've heard me say a couple times, we are in community, even though we're not in proximity. And so for me, that means getting creative. It means being flexible. And it also means acknowledging that things are not the way I want them to be, but I also trust that God will bring me to the other side. And so I can hold, I'm not okay in this moment, or this isn't what I wish it was, but I can still thank God for the blessings that I have and still have an opportunity to just acknowledge when I'm not okay and let other people not be okay too.
Absolutely. Thank you. And again, you can also check out her tips each Friday.
Yeah, meet me on Fridays. Okay, my husband, the writer of the song you heard in the beginning of the video, Samuel Brown Sr., is here to help us with some of the questions.
Miss Lisa Harris asked, do you anticipate certain persons or age groups or folks in certain economic strata responding better to this awareness?
Better to the awareness about mental health in the church? Okay. So here's the thing. I think that we will always have pockets where stigma is more ingrained. And a lot of that is around culture. So if you haven't heard the word stigma before, stigma is negative attitudes and beliefs that sort of color people's perceptions about a topic. So in particular, we're talking about mental health stigma. I think there will always be pockets where stigma is more ingrained. And typically those pockets are in the populations that either are most vulnerable or who have been most impacted by people doing things they shouldn't do, right? So if we think about for African Americans, things like the Tuskegee experiment or Henrietta Lacks, right, have really colored our perceptions of medical professionals. And the folks who really lived through those experiences, for instance, people who are older or people who might not have had varied experiences, people who live in areas that are still really segregated or in areas where they still have those kind of practices going on a regular basis, those folks might have a harder time kind of latching on to something different and something new. And so I think there's a possibility that it can be harder. I also think that depending upon your denominational tradition, frankly, a part of what I'm asking you to do in the book is re-envision some of what we've thought about God and the church. And if you are from a particular denominational tradition where re-envisioning is not a piece of what the parishioners do, you might have a challenge there too, right? I'm not saying you can't do it, but I do think that those folks might have to sit with and chew on the material a little differently to be able to access this. But I'll say that I tried to be really intentional, about making it accessible to a wide range of people, so that even if the first time you read it, you're like, I don't know about that. Maybe the second time you read it, you're able to hear it differently and integrate it into what you already know.
Dr. Mary Young asked,
That's my mama, y'all.
Mary.
The Mary Hunter Young.
She says, can you speak to the status of mental health for African Americans?
In general, okay, I think I'll try to answer your question. So African American women are an interesting group in that we experience discrimination, oppression, all those kinds of things. We also are the largest group of growing entrepreneurs in the US. We also have high levels of educational attainment, right? And so often for Black women, there's this dichotomy of I've been through a lot and I've accomplished a lot. And for me, one of the things that I see in my clinical practice is that Black women really need spaces in some ways to come undone, because there's so much responsibility to have it together. And some of that is roles that we've picked up. Some of that is demands that's been placed on us by other people in our lives. So I think that's a combination. And so a lot of what I do is just trying to help Black women make spaces to talk about what they're experiencing. And it goes back to this piece of, can we allow ourselves to be whole people, even the messy parts, right? And so for me, even as a professional, it's about acknowledging, yeah, I can be Dr. Jessica Young Brown and have a bad day and not be okay, right? And one does not negate the other. But in fact, if I allow myself to be both of those things, all of those things, I have a more well-rounded and authentic experience. So I think Black women we're doing the work and trying to get the help that we need. I think anytime you're talking about something like mental health treatment or medical treatment, socioeconomic status comes into play. And so we really need to think about what it means to attend to and reach out to those women who are economically vulnerable, because they might be less likely to have the resources to get the help they need to really live full lives. And we can be a part of that solution.
And actually, it's a good follow-up question to that. Joe Lewis Satterwhite Jr. asked, are you saying that many African Americans define themselves by the generational trauma, or are they not able to get over the trauma?
Oh, so I would say that we as African Americans actually don't define ourselves through that lens of generational trauma. I think that one of the challenges we face is that when we don't know that we might be experiencing or even recreating that generational trauma, we limit our ability to heal from it. Black folks we are really resilient people. We've been through a whole lot, right? Yeah. In this country, on the Atlantic Ocean, we have been through a lot as a people. And so I think one of the things we do is we focus on the resilience without acknowledging that resilience is in reaction to a very real trauma. Right. And that's complicated by the fact that we live in a country that basically tells us to get over it and move on. Right. And so I am a firm believer that it really is an act of resistance to say, yes, this happened to me and it impacts the way I move in the world, but I will not be defined by it because it's not all of who I am. And so I think acknowledging generational trauma in our communities is really about moving to the place where we're not defined by the trauma, but we name it and we acknowledge that it happened and bear witness to the fact that our existence in 2020 is on the shoulders of the ancestors who suffered that trauma.
Okay. I think, let me see, I'm going back. There was a question back earlier about where is it? Oh, Marco D. McNeil says, you spoke of allowing yourself to feel.
Mhm.
How do you allow others to feel without jumping right into being the fixer or the fixer role?
Ooh, that's a good question. So Marco asks, how do you allow others to feel without jumping in to be the fixer role? This is such a good question. And it's a part of what I talk about in the book. What I'll say here, though, is that a part of the way we shift that mentality is by acknowledging that just because someone has a feeling, especially if it's a quote unquote negative feeling, it doesn't mean we have to make it go away. Sometimes those tears, that grief, that anguish are necessary for us to move through whatever that experience is. And if we jump into fixing it, we take away a person's opportunity to heal. One of my former doctoral students, Mary Adasamwan, some of the STVU folks probably know her. She wrote her doctoral project about grief in the Black church in particular, and how one of the things we do in the Black church is kind of cut off people's grief experiences. Like, think about the stuff that we say at funerals. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Earth has no sorrow, heaven can't heal. And it's like, that's cute. I'm not saying that's wrong. So y'all, please don't. Hopefully people know my heart. Y'all know I love the Black church. I do. But listen, the day after my father died, someone telling me he's in a better place was not helpful to me because I wanted him in this place with me, right? And so a part of what we can do is acknowledge that just because a feeling makes us uncomfortable or just because it's a sad feeling doesn't mean it doesn't serve a purpose. And Mary, in her project, talks about the fact that in many traditional African cultures, there are women who wail at the loss of a community member, and that their role is to hold, acknowledge, and bear witness to the grief of the whole community. Right? And so their wailing is not something that we push away, but it's actually a communal expression. This person lived, they impacted us, and we will miss them when they are gone. Right? And so what does it mean then if we allow those quote unquote negative emotions to be ways to bear witness to what has happened to us rather than trying to cut them off and make them disappear? And I think that's the shift we need to make. If you need like a practical strategy for what to do when you're actually sitting with the person, the first thing you can do is just shut up and hand the person a tissue. I mean, really, because often it's not something that we need to fix. We just need to bear witness to it. You know, how many of us have had an experience where we called a friend, we were upset about something, and we just really needed to vent, right? We didn't need them to fix it. We didn't need them to make it go away. We just needed somebody else to hear and validate our experience. And so often those emotions that we perceive as negative, really what the person needs is for us to bear witness. And so you sit there, and if you need to pray or count the tiles or look at your shoelaces so you can provide a ministry of presence and silence, then do whatever you need to do to regulate yourself. Because when we move into fix, it's really about our own discomfort with that emotion. And the message we send the person is, I'm not okay with this, so you need to stop. But really, the message we want to send is, I'm here with you and I see you. I can't fix it, but you are not alone.
So a couple questions came in. I think that I'm going to put them together.
Okay.
One from Margaret Young and of course from Reverend Dr. Emmett Young.
Mm-hmm.
They both kind of talk about incorporating these strategies in the church.
Yeah.
Ms. Young asked about, have you encountered any opposition? People push back from kind of traditional atmospheres.
Mm-hmm.
And Pastor Young is asking, you know, in traditional atmospheres, how can a pastor incorporate?
Right. So have I gotten pushback? You know, I think the thing I've gotten pushback most on is this idea that mental illness is not a spiritual failing. People really struggle with that concept. And I think that's because churches have been telling us otherwise. So I think that's the thing I've gotten the most pushback on. And part of what I talk about in the book, and maybe this is another writing project too, is that there are actually lots of figures in the Bible who are experiencing mental health symptoms. And again, we just look at how God responds. Elijah goes into a cave and says, Lord, kill me. I'm done. That's what he does. He's like, you know what? I've had too much. And isn't that the person who has suicidal ideation and wants to end their life because they see no way out, right? So God doesn't come in and say, well, why aren't you praying enough? And you're too blessed to be stressed. God comes and says, look, I see you. Here's some food. Rest for 40 days. Then you can journey again. So what does it mean then, back to Marco's question, if instead of trying to fix it and go away, we just say, look, what you're doing is communicating a need. How can I help you to meet that need? That's really what the whole entire book is about. How can I see the need? How can I help you to meet the need? Because if that's not what the church is supposed to do, y'all, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's what we're supposed to be about. So, and for no matter your church, whether you're traditional, whether you're progressive, whether you're non-denominational, whether you're Baptist, really the book is about relational strategies. It's about how we engage one-on-one. And then you can decide as a church what might be most appropriate from a programmatic perspective. For some churches, maybe you just start with a bulletin board. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. That's part of the reason the book came out in April. So you can buy it, read it in the next couple of weeks. And then maybe we might be back in church by May. I don't know, but you can do a virtual bulletin board on your Facebook Live after you preach your sermon about Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And so maybe you just start with the bulletin board. Maybe you look at the litany in the back of the book and email it to all your church members and pick a Sunday in May where you all recite it on your conference call or your Facebook Live or whatever the case may be. For some churches, maybe you have a health fair, and as a part of that health fair, you include mental health resources, right? And so a part of what I'm asking you to do in the book is not to develop some cookie cutter strategy, but to think about the principles set out in the book and then look at the culture in your church and figure out what will work for my folks, right? I think one of the reasons why churches reach out to me related to mental health is because I can talk the church language. I can quote the scripture and do all that kind of stuff. And I'm not the only one of me, right? There are lots of mental health professionals who see our call as working with the church folks. And so maybe you bring one of those people in to have a conversation. There's another awesome licensed social worker in Maryland. Her name is Anita Phillips. And she actually just started a podcast called In the Light. She's a licensed minister and a licensed clinical social worker, and she does the same work of just bringing the biblical conversation about mental health into the church. And so, if nothing else, this is just about providing people with resources. And that's why I said the book is great to use for a Bible study. You can break it up into 5 or 6 weeks and work on a certain task each time, or pick a chapter to work on per week. But you can also have your leaders read this book and really think about how can we exhibit some of these practices in our pastoral care that we do, whether it's bereavement, whether it's doing hospital visits, those kinds of things. Hopefully that answered your question and wasn't too much of a tangent.
No, actually, I think that was good because that answer addressed a question from a little while ago from Sister Valerie Carter Smith. She was asking about some strategies to dealing with it in the church as opposed to and addressing it from the family, as well as I think another question came in relationship to that as well, strategies from Miss Pope. She asked a question about that as well.
Okay.
Incorporating some strategies in a traditional atmosphere. You had a follow-up question, I think, from Reverend Dr. Armand Miller.
Reverend Dr. Armand Miller,
Yes,
newly minted.
Yes, sir.
Yes, 2020 graduate.
Can you speak to the pros and cons of pastoral counseling, whereas the clergy person is not trained, licensed professional? I think you were kind of.
Yes. So, okay, clergy often function as like a gatekeeper, right? They're kind of the first line of defense. And Black church folks might often go to their clergy person first before seeking out professional mental health counseling. So clergy are great for providing support, providing biblically based advice. I'm pausing because I was about to say something smart, but I think I'll save that for in a few minutes. So here are my rules of thumb. I think that pastoral counseling is great for short-term, solution-focused problems, okay? If it gets to the point where you as the clergy person feel confused or concerned, refer. In, I believe, chapter 5, the cautions chapter, there's a whole list of things I give you for even if you think it's within your purview, it ain't, and call somebody like me. So that's in chapter 5, the cautions and crises chapter. If you are having like multiple sessions with the same parishioner, like 3 or 4 sessions, they probably need a therapist. Refer. And so in the book, I talk about something that I call transference of trust as a way to do a referral to a mental health professional. If you are referring to a mental health professional, you do it in a way that, number one, you're responding appropriately to the person's needs. Number two, you communicate to the person that you care about them, and this is a way that you can continue caring about them with this particular person who you believe can meet their specific needs. So that means you have to do some work on the referral to make sure it's a good referral. There's a whole process in the book for how you can do that, questions to ask, all that kind of stuff. And number three, if you refer to a mental health professional, you move into a pastoral care role. You do not throw a business card at somebody and tell them to get out of your office. That's not how we do pastoral care, y'all. And so I think a part of the challenge that we face in the church around the referral to a mental health professional is the concern that, oh, we're just shoving them off to somebody else. No, we're not. And the transference of trust model that I outline in the book gives you a process for how to do that. It gives you specific language, if you're not sure how to say it, for how to make that referral, how to move into that pastoral care role, and then some steps for you to take after you've made the referral so you can ensure the referral sticks. But no matter what, just like if you have a member who has a heart attack, you tell them to go to their cardiology appointment and then you check up on them afterward. That's all we're talking about. Go to your therapy appointment, and I'm responsible for caring for you in the midst of it. I might call you and see, how did your session go? Did you feel like you had a good fit? You don't have to tell me the details, but I just want to make sure you felt like it was somebody you could trust, right? And so those kinds of things help people to continue to feel like they are a part of community while acknowledging that we are limited in what we can do here in this space. And a big piece of that process is our own theological work around acknowledging, if I have limitations related to this particular issue, it's not some failing on my part, and it's not a communication that God can't heal. It's a communication that God has multiple avenues through which God can heal. And this is about accessing all of those avenues.
Want to let us know we have about 4 minutes until 3. So.
Okay. And those who are asking questions that we haven't gotten to, I'll go back at some point this afternoon and just respond to the comments, because I see 108 comments and I know we ain't responded to all those. So I'll go back and respond to the comments if we didn't get your question. So don't worry, you'll get it answered at some point.
I'm going to group 2 questions for time's sake.
Okay.
Miss LaKendra Hardware and Sister WB WBB. They both kind of allude to a similar, but contextually. So, Sister Hardware is talking about, can you speak to the traumatization encountered in and sometimes perpetuated by the church on his body?
Ooh.
And Sister B alludes to generational trauma. And she says, if we acknowledge the generational trauma, is that a better way for the next generation not to take on those things?
Sure.
So I think it's kind of.
Sure. So LaKendra's talking about church hurt, right?
Mhm.
And I am a firm believer that it's kind of a cliche, hurt people. But I think when we look at people who are perpetrators of trauma and violence, they are often doing that out of a place of hurt and brokenness in their own lives. And, one of the things I tell my students all the time is bad behavior is the result of an unmet need. And for me, what that means is making space at the well means getting curious about the bad behavior. And let me be clear, if you have somebody who's a perpetrator, we set boundaries with people about what it means to engage in community, right? So I'm not finna let you just continue to hurt people and treat people any kind of way and all that, right? We're gonna set a boundary around that. But I also love you enough to see that this behavior is communicating a need that you don't know how to communicate any other way. And so loving you in this community means I'm not gonna allow you to disrupt our community or go against the values that we've set up in this community, but I'm also going to love you in a way that allows you to come back in. So I think that when we address church hurt, it's still, as Sam was saying, I think we still see that lineage of trauma being passed down, because often what we can see in the quote unquote perpetrators of that violence is that they have been perpetrated against. Right? That they're recreating something that is a familiar pattern for them. And so if we name the pattern, if we say, okay, let me just give y'all an example. If we say, the reason that this person refuses to let anybody else join the hospitality ministry and make the pound cake is because their grandmother made a pound cake and people talked about that pound cake so bad that Grandma Daisy couldn't come back to church. I'm using kind of a, right? But what happened here? Somebody in my family was not allowed a place in. So now that I'm in, I'm not going to allow somebody else to take my place. And so much of those dynamics that happen in churches, we think it's petty. We think it's little. All that person cares about is that parking space. All that person cares about is where they sit in the church, right? But y'all have to remember, 100 years ago, church was the only place we could be anybody at all. And so those status symbols or those things that feel like they don't mean anything are tied up into our personhood. And that's what I mean when I say culture sets the stage for how we talk about these traumas. Because what if, instead of just talking about that person who we believe is being disruptive, we get curious about what is the piece of this person's story that I'm missing that would help me to understand why they're engaging in this way. And remember, bad behavior is the result of an unmet need. So if I can figure out what the unmet need is, I can meet that need without the person having to engage in the bad behavior to get that need met. Maybe they need attention. Maybe they need recognition. Maybe they need validation. But if they can get that without having to cut up, then we don't have to excommunicate them, right? We can make space at the well for everybody to be who they need to be, for people to bring their messy parts. And part of what I'm saying is, if we allow people to be broken in church, then we don't have to put on the charade as a way to get what we need. We can just say, look, y'all, I feel like I've been working so hard in this church and nobody even says thank you. Or I went through this horrendous trauma and I was hurt that nobody reached out to me and supported me, right? But that means we have to create a community where people can feel vulnerable and feel like they can get what they need. That's the short answer. So I absolutely think that when we name the traumas, when we acknowledge the traumas, we can heal from them. But we got to name it, y'all. Because as long as we're walking around pretending like everything is fine and it's not, we do ourselves a disservice and we end up hurting ourselves more in the long run and then recreating that trauma that we hurt from our own selves because we haven't healed it.
I just want to chime in that it is now after 3.
Okay, is there one more question that's just burning?
And I feel like this next question from Ms. Pope kind of piggybacks on that. So
okay,
she was talking about the do you think it's equally important to recognize and talk about gender differences, ergo Black males versus females in terms of mental health and stigma, etc. And she says in dealing with trauma, microaggressions, etc., masculinity.
Yeah, so I think Michelle's point about gender differences is a good one. I think in our community, Black men are really socialized to not feel anything at all, right? To just continue to go and go and go. And that when they do feel something or show weakness, right? Weakness, it's a sign that something is wrong or that they're surrendering their manhood or something like that, right? And there's some great people in the Richmond area. James Harris is the first person who comes to mind. There's some great brothers and sisters doing this work around helping to change the narrative around Black men in particular, and really allowing men to incorporate all of themselves into what it means to be a man. My husband and I have these intense conversations about toxic masculinity all the time, right? And we will not, that's a whole other Facebook Live. But, you know, part of what we talk about is this idea that toxic masculinity isn't just about the stereotype of like men hurting women. Toxic masculinity also hurts men because it doesn't allow them to live into the fullness of who they are, right? And so this is also about it's about power. It's about how some of our male-female dynamics in Black communities are also resultant from generational trauma, and we need to be able to rethink those and rework those. It also is about figuring out what it means to live as if we are free, even though we still deal with race-related stress and trauma, even though we still deal with those gender stereotypes, right? But how can we find a space where we can really be all of who we are and allow that to be a part of the way we move in the world?
All right, is there one more? We're going to wrap up.
I think we should probably wrap up.
That was your last direct question. I'm
Okay.
sure when you go back.
Yeah, I will go back to the comments at some point, y'all, and just kind of respond to the questions that we didn't get. But can I just say, let me look and see how many people are. We have 65 people viewing right now and, 100 and some comments. And so I just want to say thank you to you all for giving us an hour of your time. I hope that if you haven't already picked up the book that you will do it. You will see I have one of my copies here too. So there are a couple of different ways that you can purchase the book. If you would like a signed copy, you can go to my website, drjessicabrown.com. Please order book plus shipping because I love y'all, but I'm not going to see you anytime soon because of the Rona. So I need to mail you your book. So please do book plus shipping. I will mail you a signed copy. If you don't care about whether it's signed or not, there are 2 ways. You can order directly from Judson Press. Judson is waiving delivery fees until the end of May, I believe, because Amazon has deprioritized book releases. So you can, probably the quickest way to get a book that isn't from me is from the Judson Press website. That link is in the video as well. And if you want to order it from Amazon, they are allowing you to order now. When I looked today, it said that the delivery date was sometime in mid to late May. So if you're not in a rush, you can get it from there as well. So those are the 3 ways to order. I encourage you all to pick it up. I hope that you enjoy it. I pray that it's helpful. If you need additional support for how to implement some of the things in your community, feel free to reach out to me. I really do want this to be something that people can use and put to work in your everyday lives. So thank you all so much.
Yes, and I just want to give a hearty congratulations to you for getting your book out, making your word flesh in the world. You are an amazing, wonderful, brilliant human being, and I'm so glad that you wrote this. I'm so glad the people that will be touched by it. I am glad that God has gifted you in this amazing way. And I know that there's so much more in store, and I promise you all, you do not want to miss this book. You want to get it. Anything else she produces and everything else she writes, just like I do. And also, just a small caveat, I work with young people, and just know that this is not just for adults, this is for
Absolutely.
everyone. I mean,
Mhm.
literally, it tells you what to look out for, what to watch. It gives cultural, I mean, she does little snippets in the back of cultural questions to consider after each chapter. She does well points. She mentioned she does a litany to affirm ministry of mental health. She does even a brief primer on common mental disorders. I mean, you got everything you need in the book. I mean, for real. So get it, get it now. If you are a seminarian, get this book. If you are teaching seminarians, get this book. If you go to church, get this book. If you
If
have
you
a
don't go
family,
to church
get
and
this
you
book.
thinking about it,
Don't
get
go to
this
church,
book.
get this book. If you have a family, get it. If you are thinking of having a family, get this book. I mean, this literally, if you are a live human being, get this book. There you go. Thank y'all for tuning in.
Thank
Have
you
an
all
amazing
so
day.
much. I will go back and look at the comments and respond, but I just want to thank you all so much for your support and for your attention. And we hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Feel free to watch us again tomorrow for your Sunday service.
Bye.